song by the OJs about OJ. I love that song. We're here to talk about, of course, the city and the body. I decided today that I was going to talk about, I guess, my own consciousness with Monopoly and how that has sort of formed my own little thinking about how the city works. That coupled with a house of sisters and my mother, this is my sister's sort of take as she prepares herself as a young child for her day's activities, ironing and preparing her cricket doll in some sort of fashion. For myself, when I started my firm with purpose, I started with this diagram, becoming very clear about when I bought my home in Devington, about what my relationship was with my community and my street, and also what my relationship was, with other objects such as the sky or the horizon, things that I thought were important. At a young age, when I was at the University of Minnesota, I think I was trying to figure out and interpret what that relationship would be. That as a young designer, how would I sort of make my way either inside the box or outside the box? And I think that architects for a long time, including these out of New York, this was the Beaux-Arts Ball, and architects, I think, were also, again, very fascinated with how the body and the building, right, would go together, right? Well, here's what it looked like, right? There's the Chrysler Building, right? And this is sort of what it meant to them. During this reflection for these gentlemen, the theme asked for them that they look forward, not backwards. And in 1931, in front of, I guess a full house, the sort of flame and silver was recognized as the dawning of a new age for architecture. Right? And I feel that even today, when I'm asked to go and talk, this is a young student at Southern Illinois University, and he's not doing a building, but he's first trying to understand the body, right? So the assignment was how architects might understand this idea of fluidity and how one might move and maneuver and sort of interpret the terrain that is the jungle, right? Even for me, myself, everyone kind of asks and wonder, what is the with purpose kicking guy? But that he also would come in and kick down old models in order to create new models, and that the movement of the body through the city would also be present in my firm, that is actively what we'd be going after, right? The sort of real attack on how we would solve cities' problems. For some people and some architects, this is how they solve their problems, right? They sort of prepare themselves in an outfit of a different kind, the Banana Republic. Right? And so I love here, right? Frankie says, well, firstly, these people look really well rested, which in most offices today, that probably will not be the case. The reality is that most of our relationships, our buildings' relationships with cities, maybe looks like this, a commodity, right? Where the fashion and the brand are hard to distinguish. And I took a particular interest in this sort of short film called Logorama. It's a great short film that you should watch, about 15 minutes. But it talks about sort of this reality, but at all phases of life. And it shows how one maneuvers through this sort of consumerism, right, between fashion and architecture. I was really interested, though, in the Prada model, right? Out of all those, compared to the Levi's, Prada, right, is sort of the example, right? Prada's a smart fashion company, right, who knows that design at the scale of the street meant not just a relationship with the physical experience, right, but the non-physical experience. This is how they operate. And in their book, when they describe how they decided to locate their building, they were very specific about that sort of product, that the body would be related not only to the object, but to the lifestyle that went with that object. That as a fashion designer, that is how they were going to get people to relate to the street, right? So for this woman here, this is Maria, we're in Toledo, and she decides that, in this sort of Prada model on how you might move seamlessly between buildings and between cities, that she would text her order in, she would move through the door, and then she would present herself into the landscape. I love that. For this gentleman, it's a different story. He's in Devington, he's a senior, he's probably not as inspired by the Prada model, yet he moves through his terrain, becoming familiar with where he lives. Right? Doug Aikens a video artist, also talked about the idea of the movement through the body. And in this case, it came at about the same time when he was talking that iPod had come up with their sort of new movement of how, as humans, we would be free, that we would no longer have the sort of disc and skipping, but that the iPod would allow us to move seamlessly, just like Prada's model, through the city and enjoy music and enjoy, the sort of movements of the street, right? Inside this, he talks about this. He says that the city resembles the human body in every way, from the sidewalks to its streets to gasoline to coffee. This was sort of how he believed the city would work, right? And when I had the opportunity to work with Kodo Design at the city market on the East Plaza, and you sort of say to yourself, well, what is this movement, this idea of movement? Well, we were inspired by the word move. When the YMCA sort of said, hey, we need something to help make this open space, this public space a little bit better. And we said, gosh, for a bike hub, how do you sort of mend this idea of cycling and running? And it was that this idea of moving, that we needed to act like there was, act in urgency, this idea of moving, right? And when we got invited to do an interior piece, the concept was this, that the body would continue to move, but how would we represent that? How would we represent the form and the idea of moving, all day long in and out of this particular building? And so this was the finished product, right? So we sort of represent the idea of the body, and then we sort of move that idea into the space. Okay. In 1980, it was awesome. I do a lot of my research coming out of understanding what the movement for hip hop was, only because that was my experience, right? So the idea of Run DMC and these sort of characters and actors try to help me understand my own physical environment. But these guys were making do with something that was different, right? The idea that a sort of renaissance in the black community would happen through movement. It would happen through the sort of flexing and making do with a new type of style. Right here it is. This was the style that sort of emerged out of that. It was fresh, it was new, it involved a lot of belts, a lot of studded belts. But this is sort of what they felt they needed to maneuver through the city. Right? You could see the buildings in the background, and in some way, because they were excluded from the conversation of the buildings, right? I think that they were fighting this sort of formalism, and that hip-hop would grow as a cultural thing to become something different that, of course, was not this. And I feel that that's where I'm at. And when I think about sort of my own thinking, it really turns to this, which was Run DMC, right? And Run DMC came out with a fashion that was way different. Straight-laced, black on black. It was as almost the old style had converged into one color, right? It was black. Black suits, and that they were going to send a new message, not just a message about the conditions of the street, but a message about politics, and that they could show up to a boardroom in what? Bam, in my Adidas. That they would show up in that straight black laced jacket and deliver a message. This was sort of the conversation that was happening, right? And even for myself and my own curiosities, it's like, well, if I was, carrying a handbag, what would that vessel be like in the city? How could women move through the city seamlessly, grab their cell phone, their keys, and their pen without having any problems, right? And so this is what I came up with. This was sort of a product where it would open up like a capsule, and that the container would have these things, at sort of a women call, and that, the urban hipster would be that piece of equipment, just like, others sort of have found. If you guys don't know Bill Campbell's article in the New York Times, it's pretty fabulous. He is, a gem of a person in New York City. He travels around the streets and he captures fashion in only a way that he can, of course. And I think I like really what he's saying. He says, you got to stay on the street and let the street tell you what it is. And this is what this gentleman has made his career doing, and it's great. I love this dinosaur thing right there, if you guys don't know what's going on there. But obviously that person feels that they need to be equipped in that outfit in order to survive what it is that's going on in New York City. I love it. So when I had the opportunity to work with a fashion designer myself, Nikki Blaine Couture invited me, I looked really hard at sort of what her fashion models were doing in their relationship to design, and they seemed to be sort of looking inward, right? And so when I got invited to her space, this is sort of what it looked like, right? So how could design right? What can it do with that model, right? Who knows? This is what we came up with, right? We took the model, we put it in there, we try to give her some sort of attitude, right? And how she would sort of function with the space, right? And then here's the final result after we are completed. Up, up, up. And you can see that the model, we put some clothes on her. It's fantastic. In closing, I want to show this picture here. My friend Gretchen sent me this a long time ago. I had it up on my desk for a long time. But she sort of lays out what she imagined some buildings on Delaware Street to be, which I thought was great. And I said, you know, Gretchen, I said, I'm trying to think of a fashion or a style. I mean, if we were going to move, I mean, what do you do with the robot store or something cool like that? And she says, well, Will, I think Earth, Wind, and Fire would be a great example of a fashion that would complement this. And I said, you know what? I think you're absolutely right. I think this is exactly the type of style we need to go back into moving into the future for Indianapolis. Thank you guys very much. Have a good night.